No athlete wanted the rusty bike, but the boy took it and made history in the race. Ethan Miller held back tears as he watched the other children arrive at the sports center in Hope Springs with their shiny, colorful bikes. He had dreamed of this moment for months, training every morning by running along the dirt roads of the neighborhood, but he knew he would never have his own bike to join the race. That's when the event organizer, Mr. Frank, a 60-year-old man with tired eyes, pointed to a dark corner of the shed where a completely rusted bike leaned against the wall like an object forgotten by time. "Look at this piece of junk," said Braden Thompson, the son of the town's bicycle shop owner, kicking the flat tire with disdain. "Who'd even want to ride something like this?" Other children gathered around, laughing and making cruel remarks. Ethan felt his heart tighten, but something about that abandoned bike called to him. Maybe it was the fact that, just like him, it was being rejected by everyone. Can I try to fix it?" he asked timidly. Mr. Frank looked at him with a mix of pity and irritation. "Kid, if you can get this scrap heap to move, you can keep it. But I doubt you'll manage." Ethan touched the rusted handlebars carefully, as if greeting an old friend. The rust stuck to his small hands, but he didn't mind. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. He carried the bike on his back for nearly 2 miles until he reached home, a tiny 2-room house where he lived with his grandma Margaret. The 72-year-old woman was hanging laundry in the yard when she saw him arrive, sweaty and out of breath. "What in the world is that, my boy?" Grandma Margaret asked, adjusting her glasses to see better. "It's a bike, Grandma. I'm gonna fix it for the race," Ethan said, leaning the bike against the house wall. His grandmother sighed deeply. She knew how much he dreamed of joining that race, but she also knew their family's limits. Ever since her daughter had left for New York City 3 years ago in search of work, they had lived only on her small pension. "Sweetheart, are you sure you can do this? Those parts must cost a lot." "I'll figure it out, Grandma, I promise." That night, Ethan worked late, using tools borrowed from a neighbor: a broken screwdriver, a small hammer, and a whole lot of determination. He discovered the brakes were completely rusted shut, and the chain seemed welded in place. Mr. Harold, the retired mechanic who lived 3 houses down, heard the hammering and came to investigate. He found the boy in the yard, lit only by the dim kitchen light, trying to loosen a part with his already bruised hands. "What kind of hour is this to be making noise, boy?" he grumbled, but his expression softened when he saw the situation. "What are you trying to do?" Ethan explained about the race and his dream of participating. Mr. Harold examined the bike with a professional eye, shaking his head. "This one's in bad shape, kid. It's nearly impossible. But I have to try, Mr. Harold. It's my only chance." The older man saw the determination in the boy's eyes and remembered himself in his youth, fighting against all odds. Without a word, he went back home. The next morning, Ethan found a plastic bag at his doorstep with some used parts: an old but working chain, brake cables, and even a patched inner tube. There was no note or name. "Grandma, look!" he shouted excitedly, showing the parts to Grandma Margaret. "Must have been some guardian angel," his grandmother said, smiling and making the sign of the cross. Ethan Miller had no idea that Mr. Harold had scoured his own shed searching for those parts, spending most of the night cleaning and testing each one. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. With the new parts, the repair work progressed. Ethan woke up at 5 in the morning to work on the bicycle before school and rushed back in the late afternoon to continue. His hands were always dirty with grease and rust, which sparked mean comments at school. "Look at Ethan's hands," the other children whispered during recess. "Looks like he's been digging through trash." He pretended not to hear, but every comment felt like a punch to the chest. What hurt the most was seeing Braden Thompson leading the teasing, always surrounded by a group of admirers who laughed at everything he said. "My mom said the race is only for people with quality equipment," Braden said one day, loud enough for Ethan to hear. "We can't just let anyone participate, right?" Mrs. Patricia, a 50-year-old teacher who had been at the school for over 20 years, watched everything carefully. She knew Ethan's situation well and secretly admired his dedication. She had witnessed many moments where he showed maturity far beyond his 10 years. After class, she called him over to talk. "Ethan, how are the race preparations going?" "Good, Mrs. Patricia. I'm almost done fixing the bike." "And have you been training?" The boy lowered his eyes, embarrassed. "Just a little, Mrs. Patricia. The bike still isn't working very well." Mrs. Patricia had an idea. She was also a cyclist in her free time and knew the race route well. "How about I help you with training? I can time you and give you some tips." Ethan's eyes lit up with excitement. Finally, someone truly believed in him. They began training in the late afternoons, on the same route where the race would take place. Mrs. Patricia was impressed by the boy's determination. Even with the heavy bike making strange noises, he pedaled with admirable strength and focus. "You have a natural talent, Ethan," she said after one training session. "Your times are really good, considering the extra weight you're carrying." "Extra weight?" "The rust, the old parts. Your bike must weigh twice as much as the others. It's like you're training with extra resistance. That's making you stronger." Ethan had never thought of it that way. Maybe his rusty bike wasn't just an obstacle. It might also be a hidden advantage. News of the training reached other parents and organizers. Mrs. Karen, Braden's mother and wife of the bicycle shop owner, was furious when she heard a boy of that social standing would compete against her son. "Frank, you can't allow this," she told the organizer during a meeting at the club. "The race has always been a high-quality event. If we start accepting anyone with any kind of equipment, we'll lose our prestige." Mr. Frank felt pressured. Mrs. Karen and her husband were the event's biggest sponsors, and opposing them could mean the end of the race in the coming years. On the other hand, technically, the boy had met the initial requirements. "Let's review the rules," he finally decided. "We need stricter safety criteria." The following week, new regulations were announced, requiring all bikes to pass a safety inspection before the race. Ethan was desperate when he heard the news. "It's not fair, Grandma Margaret," he vented to Mrs. Margaret. "They're changing the rules because of me." "Life isn't always fair, my grandson," said Grandma Margaret, stroking the boy's hair. "But that doesn't mean we should give up on our dreams. Sometimes we have to fight a little harder." Mrs. Patricia was also outraged by the sudden rule change. She knew exactly what was happening and decided she wouldn't stay silent. She went to Mr. Frank's house for a frank conversation. "Frank, you know this rule change is unfair," she said, sitting on the organizer's porch. "Patricia, I have to think about the event as a whole. Without sponsors, there's no race for anyone. And since when is money worth more than a child's dreams?" Mr. Frank sighed deeply. The truth was, the situation made him very uncomfortable. He'd been organizing the race for 15 years, ever since retiring as a PE teacher, and he always believed sports should be for everyone. "Look, if the boy can get his bike into truly safe condition, I'll approve it in the inspection," he finally said. "But I can't make exceptions. Everything has to work perfectly." Mrs. Patricia left with a mix of hope and worry. She knew Ethan Miller was doing his best, but she also understood the technical limitations he faced. Meanwhile, Ethan kept working tirelessly on the bike. He'd already managed to get the brakes working reasonably well, and the chain spun without catching. But there were still many problems. The handlebars were loose. One pedal made a terrible noise and the seat wouldn't stay at the right height. That's when Mrs. Dorothy, the neighbor next door, appeared in his backyard with an offer. "Ethan, I've got some savings set aside. How about we buy some new parts for your bike?" The boy was touched by the offer but shook his head. "Thank you, Mrs. Dorothy, but I need to make do with what I have. If I accept help now, it won't really be my victory." The woman smiled tenderly. That boy had a pride and dignity many adults lacked. "I understand, dear, but if you need anything, just ask." At school, the teasing continued. Braden Thompson had formed a group he called the Elite Team, made up of boys with the most expensive modern bikes. They made sure to train at the same time as Ethan, always speeding past him and shouting cruel remarks. "Watch out! Don't let that junk fall apart," Braden yelled during one practice. "Bet you his wheel flies off during the race," laughed another boy in the group. Ethan clenched his teeth and kept pedaling. Mrs. Patricia, who timed his laps, was impressed by his ability to stay focused despite the taunts. "How do you stay so calm when they do that?" she asked after a particularly tough session. "My grandma always says anger clouds your thinking," Ethan replied, wiping sweat from his face. "If I get mad, I'll ride worse, and they'll just be happier. The wisdom of that 10-year-old amazed her every day. With just 1 week left until the race, Ethan finally got the bike functional. It wasn't perfect. It still made noises, and the rust weighed it down. But it rode, braked, and was relatively safe. The technical inspection would happen the day before the race. Ethan barely slept the night before, anxious and nervous about what might happen. On inspection day, he arrived early at the sports center with the bike cleaned and prepped as best as he could. Mr. Frank inspected each bicycle meticulously, testing the brakes, chains, tires, and overall stability. The other competitors' bikes passed the inspection easily. When it was Ethan Miller's turn, a tense silence fell over the crowd. All the other participants and parents were watching. Mr. Frank tested the brakes, which worked perfectly. He checked the chain, which turned smoothly. He examined the tires, which had the right pressure. The handlebars were firm, and the seat, though simple, was secure. "The bike is approved," he finally announced. A murmur of discontent spread among some parents, especially Mrs. Karen, who shook her head disapprovingly. But the decision was final. Ethan nearly shouted with joy but held himself back. Now came the hardest part, the race itself. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. On the morning of the race, Ethan woke up at 5 even though the competition wasn't until 9. He was too anxious to sleep any longer. Grandma Margaret made him a special breakfast, buttered toast, chocolate milk, and a banana. "Eat up, my boy. You'll need your strength," she said, watching as he barely managed to swallow from nerves. "But what if I can't do it, Grandma? What if the bike breaks in the middle of the race?" "Ethan, look at me," Grandma Margaret said, cupping his face in her hands. "You've already won the most important thing. You proved it's possible to fight for our dreams, even when everything seems impossible. The race is just a detail." His grandmother's words eased the boy's racing heart a little. They arrived at the sports center an hour before the race. Ethan was amazed by how many people had come to watch. Besides the competitors' parents, many residents of Hope Springs were there too. Mrs. Dorothy, Mr. Harold, Mrs. Patricia, and others who had followed his journey were present. Even some schoolmates who usually ignored him had come to watch. "Look how many people came to support you," Grandma Margaret said, touched. Ethan felt a mix of pride and responsibility. All those people believed in him, and he didn't want to let them down. On the other side, Braden Thompson was surrounded by a smaller group, but one that included the town's most influential people. His bike gleamed in the sun with high-tech components and an incredibly light frame. "This'll be a breeze," he told his friends. "I bet Ethan's bike won't even make it past the first lap." The race course was 5 kilometers long, covering paved roads, a steep climb, a dangerous downhill, and ending with a straight stretch of about 500 meters. It was a challenging route, even for experienced riders. Mr. Frank gathered all the participants for final instructions. There were 15 kids registered, ages 9 to 12. Ethan was one of the youngest, and definitely had the simplest bike. "The race will be clean and safe," the organizer explained. "Any unsportsmanlike behavior will result in disqualification. The most important thing is that everyone finishes safely." He looked directly at Braden as he said this, knowing the boy's reputation for bending the rules. The racers lined up at the starting point. Ethan took the last position, as was traditional for competitors with simpler equipment. His bike was heavy, but he felt like he knew every bolt, every creak, every reaction it had. "Racers, ready!" shouted Mr. Frank. Ethan's heart pounded. Every week of work, every moment of discouragement, every teasing from his classmates had led to this moment. "Ready, set, go!" The starting shot echoed through the sports center, and all the cyclists took off together. As expected, Ethan Miller fell behind in the first few meters. His heavy bike took longer to gain speed. Braden Thompson shot ahead along with 2 other competitors who had professional gear. The speed difference was obvious, but Ethan refused to be discouraged. He remembered Mrs. Patricia's advice about maintaining a steady pace. At the first turn, his bike chain made a strange noise and nearly slipped off. Ethan had to slow down to adjust it manually, losing even more ground. Some spectators sighed in concern. "Go, Ethan!" Grandma Margaret shouted from the makeshift stands. The support from his grandmother and neighbors gave the boy renewed energy. He started pedaling with determination again, even though he was now in last place. By the second kilometer of the race, something unexpected happened. One of the frontrunners got a flat tire after hitting a pothole at high speed. Another had mechanical issues with the gearshift of his ultra-modern bike. Ethan passed the competitors who had stopped, but he was still far from the leaders. His strategy of keeping a steady pace was working better than he'd hoped. At the third kilometer came the steepest climb of the course, a nearly 500-meter hill with a sharp incline. Many competitors slowed drastically. That's when something amazing happened. Months of training on a heavy bike had built leg muscles in Ethan that the other boys didn't have. While they struggled up the hill, he maintained a firm, consistent rhythm. One by one, Ethan passed riders who had dismounted to push their bikes uphill. His rusty bike, which had seemed like a disadvantage, had actually been training equipment perfectly preparing him for this moment. "Look at Ethan," someone in the crowd shouted. People began to notice the boy with the simplest bike climbing the ranks impressively. Cheers of encouragement came from all sides. Braden, who was in second place, glanced back and was shocked to see Ethan gaining on him. How was this possible? "He's catching up," he said to the friend beside him. "No way. Must be a trick of the eyes," but it wasn't. Ethan had gone from last place to fifth in just 3 kilometers, and most importantly, he still had plenty of energy left. The 4th kilometer brought a dangerous downhill stretch. Riders had to be very careful not to lose control. Once again, the extra weight of Ethan's bike proved an advantage. It stayed steadier on the descent, while the lighter bikes of other competitors wobbled dangerously. Ethan moved into 3rd place. Ahead of him were only Braden and Jacob Williams, an 11-year-old who always won local races. The crowd was electrified. No one had expected the race to become this thrilling. People openly cheered for Ethan, seeing in him a symbol of all the dreams that seemed impossible. Mr. Harold, the retired mechanic who had secretly helped with bike parts, had tears in his eyes. "I knew that boy was special," he told his wife. Mrs. Patricia shouted technical instructions to Ethan, advising when to speed up and when to ease off. Mrs. Karen, Braden's mother, looked visibly nervous. This wasn't part of her plan. Her son was supposed to be dominating the race effortlessly. Entering the 5th and final kilometer, Ethan Miller was just a few meters behind the leaders. His bicycle kept making strange noises, but it held on bravely. That's when Braden Thompson had a dangerous idea. He waited for Ethan to approach on a tight curve and, pretending to lose control, slightly swerved his bike toward his opponent. Ethan had to swerve sharply, veering off the ideal path and losing speed. The weight of his bike, which had been an advantage until then, now made it harder to regain his rhythm. "That was on purpose," shouted someone in the crowd who had seen the move, but Mr. Frank, who was at the checkpoint, hadn't noticed what happened. The race continued. Ethan was frustrated, but didn't lose focus. He knew there was still a chance to recover. Only 800 meters remained. On the second-to-last curve, Jacob Williams, who was in first place, miscalculated and nearly hit the curb. He had to slow down drastically to avoid falling. Braden took the lead, but Ethan was closing in fast. The final stretch was the chance for the boy on the rusty bike to show all his determination. "Go, Ethan! Now's your time!" Grandma Margaret shouted at the top of her lungs. The entire crowd was on their feet, cheering for the boy who had won everyone's hearts. It was the classic story of David versus Goliath, unfolding right there on that Sunday morning in Hope Springs. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now back to the race. In the final stretch, Ethan was just half a meter behind Braden. His rusty bike made a terrible noise, as if it might fall apart at any moment, but it kept going. 300 meters left. 200. 100. Ethan managed to pull even with Braden. The two boys glanced at each other for a second, one with desperation in his eyes, the other with pure determination. Then the unthinkable happened. 50 meters from the finish line, the handlebars on Ethan's bike began to loosen. The bolt he had tightened with his makeshift tools couldn't handle the pressure of the final sprint. The handlebars wobbled dangerously. Ethan had to slow down to avoid losing control and crashing. Braden surged ahead, already celebrating his victory. But Ethan didn't give up. With the handlebars nearly detached, he kept pedaling, using all his strength to keep the bike on course. 20 meters from the finish line, Braden made his final mistake. Thinking he had already won, he eased off the pedals and looked back to see where his opponent was. That split second of distraction was enough. Ethan, despite all the difficulties, managed to catch up to Braden again. The two crossed the finish line practically together, in such a close finish that it was impossible to determine the winner by eye. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Regardless of the official result, everyone knew they had witnessed something special. Mr. Frank ran to the finish line to check the photo finish. Ethan and Braden were gasping for breath, still unsure who had won. "It was incredibly close," said the organizer, carefully examining the images. "But..." He paused dramatically, leaving everyone in suspense. "The winner, by a matter of centimeters, is Ethan Miller." The explosion of joy was deafening. Grandma Margaret ran to her grandson and hugged him tightly, crying with emotion. Mrs. Patricia, Mr. Harold, Mrs. Dorothy, and dozens of other Hope Springs residents surrounded the boy to congratulate him. Braden was beside himself with disbelief. How could he, with his professional bike, have lost to that junk? "This is impossible," shouted Mrs. Karen. "There must be a mistake with the timing." But Mr. Frank was firm. The photo finish clearly showed that Ethan Miller had crossed the finish line first, even if by the slimmest margin. As he received the first-place trophy, Ethan looked fondly at his rusty bike. It had held on till the end, despite all the difficulties. "Thank you," he whispered to the bicycle as if it could hear him. The victory celebration lasted until late afternoon. Many people approached Ethan to congratulate him and share how his story had inspired them. "You reminded me of when I was a boy," said an elderly man with white hair. "I never had the best things either, but I always gave my best." "My son will learn so much from your example," said an emotional mother. But the most special moment came when Mr. Harold pulled Ethan aside. "Son, I need to tell you something," said the retired mechanic, slightly embarrassed. "What is it, Mr. Harold?" "Those parts you found by your door, I was the one who left them." Ethan looked at the older man in surprise. "I didn't want you to know at the time because I know you're proud and wouldn't accept help," Mr. Harold continued. "But watching the race today, I realized those parts made no difference. The victory was all yours, earned through your dedication and willpower." Ethan hugged Mr. Harold gratefully. Now he understood that help had come to him through people who believed in his dreams. Mrs. Patricia also came over to talk. "Ethan, you taught me a lot today," she said. "For years I've taught children about perseverance and determination, but you showed how it works in practice." "Mrs. Patricia, you helped me so much. Without the training, I never would have made it." "No, Ethan, I only timed your runs. Everything else was your doing. As the celebration continued, Mr. Frank took Ethan aside for a private talk. "Son, I need to apologize to you," said the organizer, visibly moved. "Why, Mr. Frank?" "Because I almost believed you didn't deserve to race. I nearly let pressure convince me that expensive gear mattered more than determination." Mr. Frank paused, looking at the rusty bike. "You know, this bike belonged to my son many years ago. When he grew up and moved to New York City, I kept it in the shed, unable to let it go. Seeing you race with it today was like a good part of the past had come back to life." Ethan was surprised by the revelation. "Did your son love racing?" "He adored it. He was passionate about bikes just like you. Now he's an engineer in New York City, but he always says his childhood races shaped who he is." Mr. Frank smiled, tears in his eyes. "You can keep the bike, Ethan. It's found the right owner." The boy was moved. Not only had he won the race, but he'd also gained a bike to call his own. "I'll take good care of it, Mr. Frank, I promise." "I know you will, my boy. I know you will." As the sun began to set, the victory celebration finally ended. Ethan and Grandma Margaret walked home, the trophy gleaming in the golden evening light. "Grandma, there's something I don't understand," Ethan said along the way. "What is it, my grandson?" Why were some people so angry about my win? I didn't do anything wrong. Grandma Margaret stopped walking and held her grandson's hands. Ethan, sometimes people believe that having expensive things is what makes someone special. When you proved that wasn't true, they got confused and angry. But that doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. But you taught an important lesson today. What makes someone special isn't what they own, but what they carry in their heart. The next day, Ethan Miller's story had spread throughout Hope Springs. Many people reached out to his family to share how inspired they felt. Mrs. Betty, the baker on the corner, offered Ethan free bread for a whole week. Mr. Bob from the local grocery said he'd give the family a special discount. Even some schoolchildren who used to tease him came forward to apologize and show their admiration. "Ethan, you're amazing," said one girl who had previously ignored him. "How did you manage to beat that Braden?" asked another classmate. The boy responded simply, without arrogance or bitterness over the hard times he'd faced. Braden Thompson, on the other hand, was going through a rough patch. The defeat had been a shock to him and his family. For years, he'd grown used to winning everything easily, always using the best equipment. Mrs. Karen was furious and even considered appealing the race results. But Braden's father, Mr. Richard, had a different reaction. "Karen, maybe it's time our son learned that life isn't always like this," he said during dinner. "What do you mean?" asked his wife indignantly. "That boy taught us something important. Having the best gear doesn't matter if you don't have the best preparation and attitude." Braden listened carefully to his parents' conversation. For the first time in his life, he was questioning his own behavior. At school, the situation had completely changed. Ethan, who had once been ignored or teased, was now respected and admired by his classmates. But he didn't let the fame go to his head. He remained the same humble, hard-working boy as always. The only difference was that now he had a bicycle in perfect condition to ride to and from school. Mrs. Patricia used the opportunity to talk about perseverance and respecting differences during class. "Ethan's victory teaches us that we all have potential," she told the students. "What matters is never giving up on our dreams, even when everything seems impossible." A week after the race, Braden approached Ethan during recess. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, visibly embarrassed. "Of course," replied Ethan, surprised by his former rival's approach. They stepped away from the other students, and Braden began to speak. "I wanted to apologize for the things I did and said," he admitted, looking at the ground. "I was really unfair to you." Ethan was taken aback by the sincerity of the apology. "Don't worry about it, Braden." "No, I should. I've always had everything easy in life, and when I saw you could beat me even with fewer resources, I got scared and angry." Braden paused, gathering courage to continue. "During the race, I tried to trip you up on purpose at that turn. That was really wrong of me." Ethan remembered the moment perfectly, but chose not to hold a grudge. "What matters is that you recognized your mistake," he said. "That shows you're a good person deep down. Do you forgive me?" "I already have." From that day on, Braden began to change gradually. He didn't become Ethan's best friend overnight, but he stopped the teasing and developed genuine respect for the boy. 2 months after the historic race, Mr. Frank announced that the next competition would be different. Inspired by Ethan's performance, he decided to create 2 categories, one for professional bicycles and another for homemade or refurbished ones. "We want all children to have the chance to participate and show their talent," he explained during the announcement. The idea was well received by most residents of Hope Springs. Now children from simpler families also felt motivated to join the races. Ethan Miller signed up again, but this time in the professional category. His bicycle had been completely restored by Mr. Harold, who offered to do the work for free. "Now you'll compete on equal footing," the retired mechanic told him. "Let's see if you're really good, or if it was just luck." Of course, he was joking. Everyone knew Ethan's victory had been the result of hard work and dedication. The new race took place 3 months later. Ethan won again, this time by a more comfortable margin. But what made him happiest was seeing many other children from modest families participating and having fun. A 9-year-old boy named Timmy, who lived in the neighboring area, took 3rd place in the homemade bicycle category with a bike he'd assembled himself from spare parts. "You're my inspiration," Timmy told Ethan after the race. "Keep training and you'll go far," Ethan replied, remembering when people had said the same to him. Ethan's story spread beyond Hope Springs. A local radio station interviewed him, and a regional newspaper published a story about the race. People from other towns began organizing similar competitions, always remembering the example of the boy who won with a rusty bicycle. Grandma Margaret was incredibly proud of her grandson. She saw in him not just a racing champion, but above all an example of character and determination. "My grandson teaches me every day," she told her neighbors. "He shows me that age is no excuse to stop dreaming." Mrs. Patricia also felt fulfilled. In her 3 decades of teaching, she'd given many lessons about values and perseverance, but she'd rarely seen an example as concrete and inspiring as Ethan's. She began using his story as an example in her lessons, always with his permission, of course. "How many of you have given up on a dream because you thought you didn't have the right conditions?" she'd ask her students. Inevitably, several hands would go up. "Then you need to learn from Ethan Miller. The right conditions are something we create through hard work and dedication," the teacher would continue. A year after the historic race, Ethan had become a minor local celebrity. But it hadn't changed who he was. He remained the same humble, hard-working boy, always willing to help others. When new students arrived at school, especially those from struggling families, Ethan made a point of reaching out and offering support. "If you need anything, you can talk to me," he'd always say, remembering how alone he'd felt before the race. Mr. Harold had become something of an official mentor to Ethan. The two spent many afternoons together in the makeshift workshop, fixing bicycles for other kids in the neighborhood. "You've got a knack for mechanics," the older man would say. "If you want, I can teach you everything I know." Ethan loved learning. He discovered he had a natural talent for understanding how things worked and how to fix them. "Who knows, maybe one day you'll open your own shop," Mr. Harold suggested. The idea excited Ethan. He liked the possibility of having a career that allowed him to help others. 2 years after the race that changed his life, Ethan had grown a lot. Now 12, he was taller and stronger, but kept the same humility and determination that made him special. His original bicycle, the rusty one nobody wanted, was now displayed in a place of honor at the Hope Springs Community Center. A plaque beside it told its story and inspired visitors of all ages. "This bicycle taught us that the value of things isn't in their appearance, but in the heart of those who use them," the inscription read. Ethan Miller visited his old bike regularly, always accompanied by younger children who wanted to hear the full story. "How come you didn't give up when everyone doubted you?" one child would inevitably ask. "Because my grandma taught me that giving up is the only way to guarantee you won't succeed," he'd reply. "If you keep trying, there's always a chance." The annual Hope Springs race had become a regional event, drawing participants from nearby towns. But its original spirit, including all children regardless of their financial circumstances, remained the same. Ethan still competed and won regularly, but his greatest joy now was watching other kids discover they could overcome their own limitations. For the 3rd-year race, he decided to do something special. Instead of competing in the professional category, he returned to the homemade bike division, riding a bicycle he'd assembled from donated parts. "Why did you do that?" Mrs. Patricia asked. "You could have easily won in the pro category." "Because I want to show the younger kids that you can still win with creativity and effort," Ethan answered. He won again, but this time he shared the podium with Timmy, who had become an excellent cyclist, and a 10-year-old girl named Emma Johnson, who had built her own bike with her father's help. That race was considered the best in Hope Springs history, not just for the results, but for the spirit of community and perseverance that filled the event. Mr. Frank, now a few years older and with grayer hair, watched it all with satisfaction. "This race became so much more than I imagined," he told his wife. "It's not just about bikes anymore. It's about showing we can all be better than we think." Ethan's story had planted a seed that kept growing. Many other kids from Hope Springs and neighboring towns embraced his example of perseverance and creativity. Timmy opened a small bike repair shop in his backyard, fixing bikes for underprivileged children for free. Emma became the first girl to win a race in the event's history, inspiring other girls to join. Braden Thompson, who had completely changed his attitude, was now one of the race's main organizers, ensuring fairness and inclusion. Even Mrs. Karen had shifted her perspective. After seeing the positive change in her own son, she began supporting initiatives that encouraged participation from kids of all backgrounds. "I was wrong," she admitted to some friends. "That boy taught us that character is worth far more than a bank account." Mrs. Patricia, nearing retirement, considered Ethan's story the greatest gift of her career. "In 35 years of teaching, I've never seen such a powerful example of how education can change lives," she said in a television interview about education. Grandma Margaret, now 75, remained Ethan's biggest supporter and advisor. Her simple wisdom had been crucial in shaping his character. "Grandma, how did you always know the right things to say to me?" Ethan asked during a Sunday lunch. "My grandson, when you truly love someone, the right words come from the heart," she replied, stroking her grandson's hair. Mr. Harold had found a new purpose in life through his friendship with Ethan Miller. The man who had retired with no big plans for the future now ran a community workshop where he taught basic mechanics to interested young people. "Ethan reminded me it's never too late to start over," he would tell anyone who'd listen. 5 years after the race that changed everything, Ethan was turning 16. He had grown into a responsible and mature teenager, but never lost the humble spirit that defined him. He still participated in local races, now as a mentor to younger kids, but his interests had expanded. He studied diligently, dreaming of pursuing mechanical engineering in college. "I want to design bikes that are good and affordable," he explained when asked about his future plans, "so every kid can have access to quality equipment." The rusty bicycle remained on display at the community center, now accompanied by a small museum that told the full story of the race. Visitors from all over the country came to see the Perseverance bicycle, as it had been nicknamed. Ethan still shared his story with anyone interested, always emphasizing that the most important thing wasn't winning the race, but learning that we all have the potential to overcome our limitations. "The trophy I won once," he would say, "but the lessons I learned that day stay with me every day." The transformation that began with a 10-year-old boy and a rusty bicycle had spread far beyond Hope Springs. Schools in many cities adopted his story as an example of perseverance, and several other inclusive races were organized, inspired by the local model. Ethan received letters from children across the country, sharing how his story had inspired them not to give up on their own dreams. "Thank you for teaching me that what matters isn't what we have, but what we do with what we have," wrote an 8-year-old boy from rural Nebraska. "I also had an old bike and almost gave up on learning to ride. After hearing your story, I kept trying until I made it," shared a 9-year-old girl from Denver. Every letter moved Ethan and reminded him of the responsibility he carried as a role model for other children. During his last years of high school, he dedicated himself to a special project, creating a bike loan program for underprivileged kids in the area. Together with Mr. Harold and other volunteers, they restored old bicycles and lent them to those in need. "It's my way of giving back," he explained. The program was a success. In 2 years, over 50 children had benefited, and many discovered a love for cycling through the initiative. When it was time to apply for college, Ethan was accepted into one of the state's top engineering schools with a full scholarship, thanks to his outstanding academic performance and community work. On the day he left for college, all of Hope Springs gathered to say goodbye to the boy who had become a symbol of hope for the community. "You'll always be our champion," said Mr. Frank, now nearly 70, during the farewell ceremony. "And I'll always remember it all started here," Ethan replied, emotional. Mrs. Patricia, now retired, made sure to be there. "You were my best student," she said, "not because you got the best grades, but because you taught things I never could." Grandma Margaret, despite her age, beamed with pride. "Go with God, my grandson, and always remember where you came from. Always, Grandma, always." Mr. Harold handed Ethan Miller a special tool. "This is the wrench I used to fix your first bicycle," he said. "I want you to take it with you to college." At college, Ethan quickly stood out, not just for his excellent grades, but for his collaborative attitude and the way he helped struggling classmates. Professors were impressed by the maturity and determination of this young man from a small town in the countryside. During his second year, Ethan developed a capstone project on low-cost, high-durability bicycles. His research caught the attention of a multinational bicycle company, which offered him an internship. "We want someone who understands the real needs of cyclists," the company director explained during the interview. Ethan accepted the internship, but made sure to stay connected to Hope Springs. Every weekend, he returned home, helping at the community workshop and participating in local races. His presence continued to inspire the town's younger generations. "When I grow up, I want to be just like Ethan," a 7-year-old boy told his mother. "Then you need to study hard and never give up on your dreams," she replied. During the internship, Ethan gained access to advanced technology and met experts from around the world. But he never forgot his roots or the lessons he'd learned fixing bicycles with makeshift tools. "You'd be surprised what you can do with limited resources," he said during a presentation to the company's executives. His unique perspective, combining technical knowledge with real-world experience, impressed everyone. In his 3rd year of college, Ethan received a full-time job offer, but chose to finish his studies first. "Education has always been a priority in my family," he explained. "I can't let my grandma down." Grandma Margaret, who now needed more care due to her age, remained Ethan's biggest supporter. "Knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you," she always said. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you've had a similar experience to Ethan's, share your honest thoughts in the comments. Do you believe perseverance can overcome any obstacle? We'd love to hear your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories.